The easiest person to underestimate is the one who never feels the need to announce who he is. On a bright autumn morning just outside Charleston, West Virginia, the familiar rhythm of a roadside gas station continued without interruption. Pickup trucks rolled slowly toward the fuel pumps, commuters hurried inside for fresh coffee, and families traveling the interstate stretched their legs before getting back on the road. Nothing about the scene suggested that within a few minutes it would become a lesson remembered far beyond that small corner of the state. A black sport utility vehicle eased quietly beside one of the pumps. The driver, a 54-year-old black man wearing dark blue jeans, a navy jacket, and polished brown boots, stepped out with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to long days of public service rather than public attention. Governor Elijah Carter had chosen to travel without his official motorcade that morning. He wanted one ordinary stop before another demanding day filled with meetings, policy briefings, and community events. Only a handful of trusted members of his security detail knew he had briefly adjusted his route to buy coffee and refill his vehicle before continuing toward the state capitol. Elijah removed his wallet, greeted the cashier with a warm smile, and exchanged a few friendly words with an elderly couple standing near the entrance. To everyone around him, he appeared to be another courteous traveler beginning his day. A few moments later, the peaceful atmosphere shifted as a patrol cruiser entered the parking lot. Officer Brian Walker, a white police officer known for trusting his instincts, stepped out and immediately focused his attention on Elijah. Something about the scene convinced him that the man standing beside the vehicle deserved closer scrutiny. He watched Elijah from across the parking lot before walking directly toward him with deliberate confidence. "Sir, I need to speak with you for a moment," Brian called. Elijah turned calmly, coffee still in one hand, his expression relaxed and respectful. "Of course, officer. How may I help you?" Brian glanced over Elijah's civilian clothing before briefly studying the identification wallet Elijah had begun reaching toward. The officer's expression hardened almost immediately. "That is far enough," he said. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Several customers looked up from the fuel pumps, quietly observing the unexpected exchange. Elijah slowly lowered his hands exactly as instructed, showing no sign of frustration. Years in public office had taught him that remaining calm often prevented small misunderstandings from becoming larger ones. Brian continued studying him with growing skepticism. "You expect me to believe those credentials belong to you?" Elijah answered evenly. "I would appreciate it if you verified them through the proper channels before making any conclusions." Brian gave a short laugh that carried across the parking lot. "People can print just about anything these days." Elijah remained perfectly still. "Verification protects everyone, officer." "That includes you." Brian ignored the suggestion. Believing he had already reached the correct conclusion, he chose to temporarily restrain Elijah while continuing his investigation, convinced he was preventing potential fraud rather than interrupting the morning of one of the highest elected officials in the state. Elijah neither resisted nor argued. He simply looked toward the clear blue sky for a brief moment before quietly saying, "Truth has a way of arriving, even when nobody invites it." Unknown to Officer Brian Walker, several miles away the governor's protective detail had already begun noticing that their principal's scheduled movement had unexpectedly stopped, and the first questions were already being asked. Elijah Carter remained standing exactly where Officer Brian Walker had instructed him, his calm expression unchanged despite the curious eyes now gathering around the gas station. A delivery driver paused beside his truck. Two college students quietly stopped filling their vehicle. Even the cashier looked through the front window, sensing that what had begun as an ordinary conversation had become something far more unusual. Elijah understood the attention, yet none of it seemed to disturb him. He had spent years speaking before crowded auditoriums, standing inside legislative chambers, and listening patiently to people who disagreed with him. Public pressure was not unfamiliar territory. What concerned him was something entirely different. Every unnecessary minute spent at the gas station meant another delay in a schedule carefully coordinated by dozens of public servants waiting for his arrival at the Capitol. Officer Brian Walker remained convinced he was making the right decision. He carefully examined the identification wallet Elijah had attempted to present only moments earlier, studying the official seal with narrowed eyes before shaking his head. "I have never seen credentials like these," Brian said. "That does not automatically make them legitimate." Elijah answered in the same measured tone he had used from the beginning. "That is exactly why I asked you to verify them through state police communications." Brian looked directly at him. "If you were really who these credentials claim you are, you would not be standing here by yourself." Elijah gave a small, understanding smile. "Sometimes public service looks much more ordinary than people expect." Brian dismissed the answer almost immediately. "Convenient explanation." Elijah did not argue. Instead, he quietly observed families continuing their morning routines around the station while autumn sunlight reflected across the fuel pumps and parked vehicles. He knew that responding emotionally would accomplish nothing. Professionalism often required patience long before it produced results. Several feet away, an older woman who had overheard portions of the conversation leaned toward another customer and whispered, "He seems remarkably calm." The other customer nodded thoughtfully. "That is exactly what I noticed." Their conversation lasted only seconds, but it reflected something slowly changing throughout the parking lot. People had begun paying less attention to Brian's confidence and more attention to Elijah's composure. Across town inside the governor's office, Chief of Protective Operations Daniel Mercer studied the morning schedule displayed across multiple monitors. One detail immediately caught his attention. Governor Carter's secure travel application had stopped updating several minutes earlier. Mercer checked the encrypted location feed again before looking toward his communication supervisor. "Has the governor checked in since leaving the residence?" The answer came quickly. "No, sir. His scheduled arrival window has already begun." Mercer frowned slightly. Governor Carter rarely changed his routine without informing at least one member of the protective detail. Even brief personal stops normally generated automatic location updates. This time, however, the tracking signal remained fixed at the same location near a highway service station outside Charleston. Mercer calmly reached for his secure radio. "Contact the advance vehicle and confirm visual status." Seconds later the reply returned. "Negative contact, sir. The governor is not with the scheduled convoy." Mercer remained composed, but his experience told him this unexpected silence deserved immediate attention. "Notify State Police Executive Protection," he instructed. "This is a verification request only. Confirm his location before the situation becomes something larger." Back at the gas station, Elijah looked toward Officer Brian Walker once more before speaking softly enough that only the officer could hear. "The strongest decisions are rarely the fastest ones. They are the ones built on verified facts." Brian remained silent for a moment, believing he still controlled the situation completely, unaware that several miles away trained professionals had already begun asking the very questions Elijah had politely suggested from the beginning. Chief Daniel Mercer stood silently before the wall of digital displays inside the Executive Protection Operations Center, watching the unmoving location indicator that represented Governor Elijah Carter's secure travel device. The room itself remained remarkably calm. Nobody rushed across the polished floor. Nobody spoke louder than necessary. The men and women responsible for protecting the governor understood that careful decisions always produced better outcomes than emotional reactions. Mercer folded his arms as another communications specialist confirmed the same information. For the third time. Governor Carter's location has remained stationary for 11 minutes at the service station outside Charleston. Secure mobile communications have not responded since his scheduled stop. Mercer looked toward the duty supervisor. "Has anyone established direct voice contact?" The answer came immediately. "No, sir. Calls continue routing to the secure device, but no acknowledgement has been received." Mercer slowly nodded. Governor Carter occasionally made unannounced stops during travel because he believed public officials should experience ordinary life whenever possible. Buying coffee, speaking with local residents, or stopping at a neighborhood business were habits that reminded him whom he served. Even so, he always maintained communication with executive protection. This unusual silence did not match his routine. Notify the West Virginia State Police Executive Protection Division, Mercer instructed. Advise them we are requesting immediate location verification. No emergency declaration. We simply need visual confirmation. Within seconds, secure messages reached the nearest state police supervisory unit. Experienced officers reviewed the governor's schedule, confirmed the encrypted tracking information, and quietly assembled a response team. Their instructions were straightforward. Travel to the location, verify the governor's safety, and restore the protective schedule. Back at the gas station, Elijah Carter remained composed despite the growing number of curious observers. The temporary restraints around his wrists did not change the calm expression on his face or the steady confidence in his voice. He understood that character became most visible when circumstances were least comfortable. Officer Brian Walker continued reviewing the identification wallet, turning it over several times before looking back at Elijah. These credentials still do not make sense, Brian said. I have never seen identification issued like this. Elijah answered respectfully. That is another reason verification matters more than assumptions. Brian sighed quietly. You keep repeating the same thing. Elijah offered a slight smile. Because the correct answer does not change simply because it is ignored. Several customers standing nearby exchanged thoughtful looks. Earlier, many had accepted Brian's confidence without question. Now they found themselves paying closer attention to the quiet consistency of the man beside the fuel pump. One truck driver removed his baseball cap and whispered to another customer, "He has stayed calm through this entire conversation." The other man nodded. Most people would not. The parking lot seemed unusually quiet as a cool autumn breeze carried a few golden leaves across the concrete. Somewhere in the distance, traffic moved steadily along the highway while life continued almost normally. Yet beneath that ordinary morning routine, events were quietly shifting. Several miles away, 3 marked state police sport utility vehicles departed their regional office with measured professionalism, accompanied by additional supervisory personnel traveling in unmarked government vehicles. There were no flashing emergency lights and no urgent radio traffic. Every officer involved understood that verification came first. As the convoy entered the highway leading toward the service station, Chief Mercer watched the movement appear on the operations display and spoke one final instruction. Maintain professional coordination with local law enforcement. Facts before conclusions. At that same moment, Elijah glanced briefly toward the highway entrance before returning his attention to Officer Brian Walker. His expression remained peaceful as he quietly said, "Sometimes the truth arrives long before people recognize it. The only question is whether we are willing to see it when it does." The autumn sun climbed a little higher above the rolling hills outside Charleston, casting long shadows across the gas station parking lot as the morning crowd slowly grew. Commuters continued arriving for fuel, fresh coffee, and breakfast sandwiches, unaware they had stepped into the middle of an extraordinary misunderstanding. Governor Elijah Carter remained calm despite the temporary restraints around his wrists, standing beside his sport utility vehicle with the same quiet confidence that had guided him through years of public service. His breathing never quickened. His voice never rose. Every person watching could see that he was making no effort to argue or resist. Instead, he simply waited with remarkable patience, trusting that facts would eventually accomplish what emotions never could. Officer Brian Walker still believed he was protecting the public. From his perspective, he had encountered a man carrying unfamiliar credentials while traveling without security or official transportation. Everything about the situation seemed inconsistent with what he expected a governor's routine to look like. That confidence kept him from recognizing the one opportunity Elijah had repeatedly offered since the conversation began. "Officer," Elijah said once more, his tone steady and respectful, "please contact State Police Communications or your supervising officer. They can verify everything within minutes." Brian looked directly at him before slowly shaking his head. "If I stopped every investigation to verify every unusual story, I would never finish my job." Elijah answered with quiet sincerity. "Verification is not an interruption of your job. Verification is part of your job. The word settled over the parking lot, leaving even nearby customers unusually silent. An elderly veteran standing beside the air pump folded his arms thoughtfully while watching the exchange. A young mother helping her daughter back into the family vehicle paused before closing the door, sensing that the calm man beside the fuel pump seemed far more concerned about proper procedure than defending his own pride. Across the parking lot, the cashier quietly stepped outside and asked another employee, "Has anyone called a supervisor yet?" The employee glanced toward the patrol cruiser before answering, "I do not think so." That realization lingered in the air almost as heavily as the silence itself. Miles away, 3 West Virginia State Police vehicles continued traveling toward the service station at a measured pace. Inside the lead vehicle, Captain Laura Bennett reviewed the governor's schedule displayed on a secure tablet. Every detail confirmed the same conclusion. Governor Carter had departed the executive residence on time. He had adjusted his route for a brief personal stop. Then every scheduled update had stopped. Captain Bennett lifted her radio. "Reminder to everyone," she said calmly. "We are conducting a verification and welfare check. Maintain professional coordination with local law enforcement at all times." Every trooper acknowledged the instruction. There would be no unnecessary display of authority, only a commitment to facts, communication, and respect. Back at the gas station, Brian glanced briefly toward the highway before returning his attention to Elijah. "You are remarkably calm," he admitted. Elijah offered a faint smile. "Public service teaches patience. Some lessons take years to learn." Brian hesitated for the first time that morning. Something about Elijah's confidence no longer felt rehearsed. It felt genuine. Yet before he could reconsider his next step, the distant outline of several approaching state police vehicles became visible beyond the highway exit, moving steadily toward the service station while the ordinary sounds of the morning continued around them, unaware that the truth was now only moments away from entering the parking lot. The first West Virginia State Police vehicle appeared at the far end of the highway exit just as another light breeze carried golden autumn leaves across the gas station parking lot. From a distance, the approaching sport utility vehicles looked no different from any other official traffic traveling through the area. There were no flashing emergency lights, no sirens, and no hurried movements. Everything about their approach reflected the quiet discipline that defined professional executive protection. Governor Elijah Carter noticed them immediately but showed no change in expression. He remained standing beside the fuel pump exactly as he had throughout the entire encounter, his posture relaxed despite the temporary restraints around his wrists. Years of public service had taught him that real leadership was measured not by how someone acted during moments of comfort, but by how they carried themselves when circumstances became unexpectedly difficult. Officer Brian Walker followed Elijah's gaze toward the approaching vehicles before looking back at him. "Expecting someone?" he asked with cautious confidence. Elijah answered honestly. "I expect the truth to arrive sooner or later." "It usually does." Brian remained unconvinced, although the certainty that had guided him earlier was beginning to soften. Something about Elijah's consistency refused to fit the image Brian had created in his mind. The man had never changed his story. He had never argued. He had never attempted to leave. Most importantly, he had repeatedly asked for only one thing from the beginning: verification. Several customers standing nearby quietly noticed the approaching convoy as well. A retired school principal looked toward the highway and counted the official vehicles entering the service road one after another. A truck driver who had remained at the station longer than planned quietly removed his sunglasses, sensing that the ordinary morning had almost reached an extraordinary conclusion. Inside the lead state police vehicle, Captain Laura Bennett reviewed one final update from Executive Protection Operations. Governor Carter's encrypted travel schedule, vehicle registration, and personal security information all matched the location directly ahead. She closed the secure tablet before speaking calmly into the radio. "Reminder to all units. We are confirming the governor's welfare and restoring scheduled movement. Maintain complete professionalism with every agency involved." A chorus of acknowledgements answered across the secure channel. Nobody discussed blame. Nobody anticipated confrontation. Every trooper understood that cooperation remained the priority. As the convoy turned into the gas station entrance, the vehicles parked with measured precision along the outer edge of the lot. Uniformed state police officers stepped out in an organized, unhurried manner, carefully observing the scene before taking another step. Their calm professionalism immediately changed the atmosphere without a single raised voice. Customers instinctively stepped aside, creating space while continuing to watch in respectful silence. Officer Brian Walker straightened his posture, now studying the arriving officers with visible curiosity. He had expected perhaps one responding supervisor if anyone arrived at all. Instead, multiple state police personnel had appeared together, each carrying themselves with the quiet confidence of people responding to something they already understood. Captain Bennett stepped forward first, scanning the parking lot until her eyes settled on Governor Elijah Carter. For a brief moment, she said nothing. Her composed expression immediately shifted to one of professional recognition. She removed her campaign hat, walked directly toward Elijah with measured respect, and stopped a few feet away. Around the parking lot, conversations faded into complete silence. Even the sound of passing traffic seemed distant as every person waiting near the fuel pumps realized that whatever happened next would explain everything that had unfolded throughout the morning. Elijah met Captain Bennett's eyes with the same calm smile he had carried from the beginning, knowing that facts had finally arrived exactly as he said they would. Captain Laura Bennett stopped a respectful distance from Governor Elijah Carter, her composed expression leaving no room for uncertainty. She removed her campaign hat and spoke with calm professionalism that carried clearly across the now silent parking lot. "Good morning, Governor. Executive Protection has been attempting to verify your location. We are relieved to see you are safe." The word settled over the gas station like a sudden change in the weather. Officer Brian Walker stood motionless, his attention shifting from Captain Bennett to the man he had questioned for the past several minutes. The confidence that had guided every earlier decision quietly gave way to disbelief. Elijah offered Captain Bennett a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Captain. Everything is all right. There has simply been a misunderstanding that can be resolved through proper communication." Bennett nodded respectfully before turning toward Brian. Her voice remained calm, measured, and entirely professional. "Officer, Governor Elijah Carter adjusted his travel schedule for a brief personal stop before today's official meetings. Executive Protection has confirmed his identity, his vehicle, and his itinerary. We appreciate your commitment to public safety, and we would like to complete the necessary coordination together." There was no accusation in her words. No raised voice. No public criticism. The professionalism of her approach made the quiet surrounding the parking lot feel even more significant. Several state police officers remained where they were, giving local law enforcement every opportunity to handle the moment with dignity. Brian looked toward Elijah once more, then back at Captain Bennett. For several seconds he searched for words that refused to come. The customers watching nearby slowly began realizing they were witnessing the conclusion of something far larger than an ordinary traffic investigation. The elderly veteran standing beside the air pump lowered his head thoughtfully. The retired school principal quietly folded her arms. Even the cashier standing outside the convenience store remained completely still. Elijah broke the silence first. "Captain, before anything else, I would appreciate having these temporary restraints removed so we may continue today's schedule." Brian immediately acknowledged the request. His movements were careful and respectful as he released the restraints without unnecessary conversation. Once free, Elijah calmly adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, picked up the coffee cup he had set aside earlier, and thanked Brian with a simple nod rather than a gesture of frustration. That unexpected kindness seemed to surprise everyone present. Captain Bennett looked toward Brian again. "Officer Walker, Executive Protection always encourages local officers to remain alert. Your willingness to investigate unusual situations is appreciated. The only step that should have happened sooner was verification through supervisory channels." Brian lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "You are correct, Captain. Governor Carter asked me more than once to verify his identity. I believed my judgment alone was enough." Elijah responded before anyone else could speak. Experience teaches us many valuable lessons, officer. One of the most important is that confidence should always walk beside verification, never ahead of it. Brian met the governor's eyes and quietly nodded. I understand that now. Around the parking lot, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The tension that filled the morning only minutes earlier had been replaced by quiet reflection. The arriving state police officers did not surround anyone with displays of authority. Instead, they stood together with calm discipline, demonstrating that genuine leadership required neither unnecessary force nor dramatic gestures. Sometimes the strongest statement came from professionals choosing respect over pride. As Captain Bennett prepared to escort the governor back to his vehicle, the autumn breeze carried another wave of golden leaves across the pavement, reminding everyone present that ordinary places often become unforgettable because of the lessons learned there rather than the events themselves. Governor Elijah Carter took one slow breath of the cool autumn air before turning toward his vehicle. The temporary delay had ended, but the lesson unfolding around the gas station had only begun. Captain Laura Bennett quietly spoke with members of the Executive Protection Detail while several state police officers respectfully resumed their normal positions around the parking lot. There was no celebration and no display of authority. The professionalism shown by every person present reflected the responsibility they carried rather than the power they possessed. Officer Brian Walker remained standing near his patrol vehicle, watching as the governor calmly gathered the sealed folder and coffee cup he had set aside earlier. The silence between them lasted several moments before Brian finally stepped forward. Governor Carter, he said sincerely, I owe you an apology. I allowed my assumptions to reach a conclusion before the facts had the opportunity to speak. Elijah looked at him with the same steady expression that had never changed throughout the morning. Officer Walker, accepting responsibility is never a sign of weakness. It is often the first step toward becoming a better public servant. Brian nodded quietly. I should have contacted my supervisor the first time you requested verification. Elijah answered without hesitation. That single phone call would have protected both of us. Good procedures exist because none of us can know everything alone. Nearby, Captain Bennett listened without interrupting. She had witnessed many difficult situations during her years in executive protection, but she understood that moments like this often shape careers more than formal training ever could. She approached the two men with a respectful smile. Governor, the updated schedule has already been coordinated with the Capitol. Your next meeting has been adjusted. Elijah thanked her before looking back toward Brian. Officer, I hope you continue asking questions whenever something feels unusual. Public safety depends on alert officers. I simply hope today's experience reminds all of us that verification should always come before certainty. Brian answered honestly. It will stay with me for the rest of my career. Around the gas station, the ordinary rhythm of the morning slowly returned. Customers finished pumping fuel. Families climbed back into their vehicles. The cashier greeted another traveler walking through the front door as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet those who had witnessed the encounter carried away something they had not expected to find during a routine stop for gasoline. The retired school principal quietly remarked to the elderly veteran, I thought I was watching someone defend his position. Instead, I watched someone defend his character. The veteran smiled gently. There is a difference, and today everyone here saw it. Captain Bennett opened the rear passenger door of the governor's sport utility vehicle, but Elijah paused before getting inside. He turned once more toward the parking lot, taking in the people who had gathered, the officers who had quietly returned to their duties, and the peaceful scene that had replaced uncertainty with understanding. Every badge represents public trust, he said calmly. That trust grows stronger whenever we choose fairness before judgment. Nobody answered immediately because the words required no further explanation. Brian removed his patrol cap for a brief moment as a simple gesture of respect. Elijah acknowledged the gesture with a warm nod before entering the vehicle. As the state police convoy prepared to escort the governor back toward Charleston, the golden leaves continued drifting across the pavement beneath the bright West Virginia sky. The misunderstanding was over, but the lesson remained behind, quietly reminding everyone who had witnessed it that genuine authority is never measured by how loudly it announces itself. It is measured by the dignity, humility, and respect that remain long after the moment has passed. The convoy moved steadily along the highway toward Charleston beneath a sky washed clean by the cool autumn morning, yet Governor Elijah Carter's thoughts remained at the quiet service station they had just left behind. The delay had added only a few minutes to an already demanding schedule, but the lesson carried far greater weight than the inconvenience itself. Inside the lead state police vehicle, Captain Laura Bennett reviewed the revised itinerary one final time before speaking over the secure communications channel. "Governor, your first meeting has been adjusted by 15 minutes. Every agency involved has been updated, and the remainder of today's schedule remains unchanged." Elijah smiled appreciatively. "Thank you, Captain. Please also thank everyone for responding with professionalism rather than urgency. That made all the difference." Bennett nodded. "Professionalism is always our strongest response." Several miles behind the convoy, Officer Brian Walker remained parked at the edge of the gas station for a few additional moments before returning to patrol. He sat quietly inside his cruiser, replaying every conversation that had taken place since the governor first stepped beside the fuel pump. The words that stayed with him were not about authority or public office. They were the simple reminders that verification protected everyone and that confidence should never replace facts. He reached for his radio and contacted his shift supervisor. "Sergeant, I would like to review today's incident after my shift. There are procedures I need to understand better." The supervisor answered without hesitation. "That is exactly what we will do." Across the parking lot, the elderly veteran who had witnessed the entire encounter finished filling his truck before quietly speaking with the retired school principal. "People often think character appears when life is easy," he said. "This morning reminded me that character becomes visible when someone has every reason to become angry but chooses dignity instead." She smiled gently. "And perhaps leadership looks much quieter than most people expect." Their brief conversation ended as they wished each other a safe journey and drove away carrying a memory that would stay with them far longer than the stop itself. Later that afternoon, inside a conference room at the state capitol, Governor Carter concluded an education policy meeting before one of his advisors quietly asked whether he wanted to issue a public statement about the morning's misunderstanding. Elijah considered the question carefully before shaking his head. "No," he answered. "One difficult moment does not define an entire profession. Most officers serve honorably every day, and today's lesson belongs in training and conversation, not in public embarrassment." His advisors understood immediately. The goal had never been to create division. It had always been to strengthen trust. That same evening, Captain Bennett submitted a brief operational summary recommending additional coordination discussions between executive protection and local agencies whenever travel plans changed unexpectedly. The recommendation emphasized communication, verification, and mutual respect rather than criticism. Every supervisor reviewing the report agreed that the incident had revealed an opportunity to improve cooperation without diminishing anyone's commitment to public service. As the sun settled behind the West Virginia hills, life across the state continued as it always had. Patrol officers answered calls, state police monitored the highways, public officials attended community meetings, and ordinary families gathered around dinner tables. Yet somewhere among those ordinary moments, a simple truth quietly endured. Real leadership is never proven by winning an argument or displaying authority. It is revealed through patience, fairness, humility, and the willingness to let truth arrive before judgment decides the story. That lesson remained far more lasting than the misunderstanding itself, carried forward by everyone who chose to remember not who held the greatest title, but who demonstrated the greatest character. Several weeks passed, and the autumn colors that had filled the hills outside Charleston slowly gave way to the first signs of winter. The service station where the unexpected encounter had taken place returned to its familiar routine. Travelers stopped for coffee before work, families filled their vehicles before weekend trips, and truck drivers continued their long journeys across West Virginia. To anyone passing through, it looked like another ordinary place along the highway. Yet for the people who had witnessed that quiet morning, the memory remained vivid because it had revealed something much greater than a misunderstanding. Governor Elijah Carter never spoke publicly about the incident except during a leadership forum attended by community members, educators, and law enforcement representatives. Without mentioning names or specific locations, he shared a simple reflection. Every person deserves the opportunity to be known by truth before being judged by appearance, he said. Public service is strongest when humility guides authority. The audience remained silent for a moment before responding with thoughtful applause, not because his words were dramatic, but because they carried the quiet weight of experience. Across town, Officer Brian Walker had also changed in ways that could not be measured by a single report or training record. He became one of the first officers in his department to recommend additional instruction focused on supervisory verification, communication between agencies, and recognizing that unusual situations deserved careful investigation instead of quick conclusions. During one training session with newly hired officers, Brian stood before the classroom and shared the lesson honestly. Confidence matters, he said. But confidence without verification can create mistakes that professionalism would have prevented. The recruits listened carefully because they could hear genuine humility behind every sentence. Captain Laura Bennett later reviewed the updated coordination procedures developed jointly by State Police Executive Protection and local law enforcement. The recommendations were straightforward. Encourage immediate supervisory communication when official credentials appear unfamiliar. Verify before concluding. Maintain professional respect during every interaction regardless of appearance, clothing, or circumstance. The new procedures did not exist because one person had failed. They existed because every agency believed good professionals continued learning throughout their careers. Governor Carter quietly thanked everyone involved for approaching the experience with integrity rather than pride. He understood that lasting improvements rarely came from public embarrassment. They came from people choosing wisdom over ego and cooperation over blame. Months later, the retired veteran who had witnessed the entire encounter returned to the same gas station while traveling through Charleston. As he stood beside the same fuel pump, he smiled to himself, remembering the calm man who had never demanded respect because he carried respect within himself from the very beginning. The parking lot looked exactly the same, yet it reminded him of a lesson he would never forget. Authority may open doors, but character earns trust. Titles may command attention, but humility inspires confidence. A badge may represent responsibility, but integrity gives that responsibility meaning. In the end, the most important moment that morning was never the arrival of the state police or the realization that the quiet traveler was the governor. The most important moment was watching dignity remain unshaken while assumption slowly gave way to truth. Some people believe justice arrives with loud voices and dramatic victories. Sometimes it arrives quietly, carried by patience, protected by truth, and remembered through character. Because when authority is guided by humility and judgment is replaced by fairness, everyone leaves stronger than they were before, and that is the kind of leadership that never needs to introduce itself.